to welcome everybody and to celebrate our next speaker in the Colloquium series, celebrating our accomplished alumni, particularly those who are outside of the region and what they've done with their careers. And Karin has a very inspiring example. And I will let Katie introduce you.
Sure. Thank you, Blaine, and welcome everyone. It's a great honor for me to be introducing today's guest speaker, Karin Liljegren. She has dedicated her career to community building, sustainability, and advocacy by embracing adaptive reuse as a powerful means to revitalize our cities. In 1999, she worked on the very first projects under Los Angeles Adaptive Reuse Ordinance, which launched her nuanced understanding of the challenges and opportunities of adaptive reuse. She became a fellow of the AIA in 2020 based on her drive to elevate the architect's role in urban revitalization by creating a nationally applicable model for the practice of adaptive reuse through introducing policy innovations, strengthening industry expertise, and empowering community growth. Karin founded Upgiving in 2009, and since then, the firm has built a reputation for uncovering potential in underutilized buildings by transforming them into hotels, multifamily housing, offices, restaurants, and bars. Upgiving has grown and expanded, having touched more than 500 buildings in greater Southern California and beyond. Welcome, Karin, and thank you so much. We look forward to the talk.
Thank you. And it's funny, I think I recognize some of that text from my FAIA, my fellow application, which as we were talking about just 2 minutes ago, being uncomfortable with praising yourself or saying all your accomplishments, applying for the F was an incredibly difficult, an uncomfortable thing to do, because you had to identify every single thing you've ever done that was so amazing, and then kind of summarize it and say how you're impacting the profession and changing it for the better. And it was also an amazing exercise to force yourself to do that. I think, especially when you're just plowing through the work year after year and giving it all you got, and then like really pausing to do that. So a little bit of an aside, but I think that also kind of represents, me talking about myself today. So thank you. Really appreciate being here today. So I'm going to bring up my thing, and I'm going to keep this very kind of informal and personal and conversational, which I think is always a little bit more fun. I'm going to put the timer on so I don't like go nuts. Wait. Oops. Okay. All right, so we're all good there. Everybody can see and everything. So I always think too that when you talk about your career, you really have to start at where you started from. And I will admit, I was brought up in a very middle-class, white, suburban, this was in New Jersey environment, and very nurturing family, youngest of 3 daughters. I was given a lot more freedom, and also kind of out of the chute, my mom recognized, oh, she's very independent and she's a go-getter. And that was about all the explanation I got later in life as to what my mom thought of me as a child, because they were not as engaged, I think, in, understanding all the nuances of kids like we are today. And I was kind of out of the chute, really obsessed with New York. And this was the vibe in the 70s and 80s. It was messy, it was edgy, it was scary to most people. And I think part of that really interested me. So then went to UNCC, and on the left, I think that was probably when I was 18 or 19. And then UCLA, so UNCC, I finished with my BA in architecture in 90. And I was just saying, I think I was the last studio that was still in the old building when I had Levius Woods there. And so that was really interesting. And literally there was just trash and paper and stuff all over the place. It was a really, a really weird thing and wonderful. And then I went to UCLA for my MArch, and that was a 3-year program after. So that's what got me to California. And oops. And so then I landed, there was a little bit of a mini recession, but I was able to get a job at this firm called KFA. And a few years in, they were given the first adaptive reuse project. So the city of Los Angeles has had a really beautiful historic core in our downtown, which was, I would say, 80 to 90% vacant. So it was really, it wasn't even like there was crime there, because there was just nobody there. There weren't even homeless people there. It was just empty. It was very strange. So the city finally came up with an ordinance that said, hey, we're going to incentivize redevelopment of this historic core and try to create these old, or renovate these old historic buildings to become housing. So I happened to get thrown on this project, and that's one of those examples of, in life, sometimes a door opens that you have no idea you're meant to go through. I had no interest in historic buildings, just not really interested in that. And when I started on the first few, I just got obsessed. I got obsessed with like the potential of this underutilized downtown and how beautiful these buildings were, and seeing the before and after, and like breathing new life into them. And they were so challenging and so interesting. And so when I was at KFA, so there was probably the last 10 of those 15 years, I think there was 12 historic high rises I converted to housing, and about 2,000 units. And I was, like the project lead, the designer, the project manager, most of the production, a lot of the times. So it was very intense time. At the same time, I got married, had a kid, bought a house, built a second house in the backyard. It was pretty insane. Not that things aren't insane now, because that's just who I am. So this is a little diagram, and actually this was one of the slides or things that I had for my fellow application. But it just kind of describes what was happening and how I contributed to it. So on the left kind of talks about the history of downtown Los Angeles, kind of when it started in the 20s up through 2020. And obviously it doesn't show the decline we've had in the last 2 years, because this slide is 3 years old, or 2.5 years old. And then the graph of the reddish shows the occupancy of the buildings in the historic core throughout that time. So you can see where it was really thriving, and it was like the heyday, the place to be in the 30s through the 50s. Then it really declined and was almost empty. And then you can see in 99 when the adaptive reuse ordinance came around. And then once I started working on all these buildings in like boots on the ground kind of stuff, I also realized, I'm one of the few people that really sees what's working and what's not working with this ordinance, or what's easy or difficult with these buildings. And so I was kind of initially I was thrown into some of the city folks asking for help. And then I got really interested in creating more incentives or bulletins, or reinterpreting the historic building code and trying to get that into place to make it easier and better. And the whole aspect of advocacy and policy reform has become really key as to some of the things that I'm involved in, and how they integrate into the work that I'm doing. So I started that in 2009. So it was the height of the recession. I had a really stable job, and everyone's like, what are you doing? Like leaving? But there was just something, I think I just turned 40, and there was a couple very strong signs that came to me somehow. And so when I started on Giving, I really wanted to continue to focus on revitalizing downtown. I also really wanted more of a design-centric firm, and really integrating architecture and interiors. So kind of like full service. And I also wanted to create a model of a firm that wasn't your typical architecture firm, which I'll go into a little bit more later, because that's still forming. So at I'm Giving, so we're all about uncovering potential spaces, buildings, communities, and also our staff. Like we're really into like, how do we all kind of find potential and move forward with it, you know, take it forward. So the word omgivning is a Swedish word, and it means the way a space feels, kind of like how it feels around you. And there really is an English word for that. And I didn't really want to use my difficult last name Liljegren, so instead I used a difficult other word, omgivning or omgivning in Swedish. But I think it does really kind of represent what we're about. So yeah, are the scales of our projects, you know, like on the small end, 600 square feet, on the big end, 1.8 million. And then the types, yeah, it's kind of like everything: office, hotel, restaurant, bar, lots of housing, theaters. Our firm, yeah, so we're 100% women owned so far, hoping to like start to expand that out to my staff. This is a little bit of an old slide, but yeah, we were up to 40. Now we're down to about 26, I think. And then we're starting to grow again, which is great because last 2 years have been horrific for the firm, especially with adaptive reuse. Really took, and being downtown LA centric was, we really took a hit because city centers took a bigger hit than outside city center areas. And we really saw that. And then also our approach, which might even be obvious at this point, is this is very macro to micro. So on the macro side, yes, it's very much about, you know, community and this kind of larger network. You know, it's not just the building, it's the community, but even, you know, how you can amplify local histories, you can facilitate neighborhood growth, but the bigger side, even the policy reform, which I've already talked about a little bit. And then on the macro side, and that's part of the cohesion between the full design aspect that I wanted to integrate into my firm, was this, you know, more the humanist side. You know, how does it feel? How is the light and the color and the form and the texture and the details? But, you know, how do we deal with well-being and social connections and human-centered design, really? So we're definitely generalists, right? Because we're trying to hit everything, which is hard, especially if you're a smallish firm. So yes, this is the street that our office is on. It's, you know, it's been really great to be in the community. And again, the street really has encampments on it now and drug dealing. I mean, it's in bad shape right now. This is our office interior. Again, pre-COVID, when people were actually in the office all the time. And I'll talk about the direction we're going with a new office a little bit later. And there's a little delay here. There we go. Yeah, we used to, I should say, and now we're coming back to it, is like, you know, our social events, going up on the roof, having happy hours. Oh, see, I think there's one. There we go. That one's missing. We're very interested in sharing knowledge and learning. So even during the pandemic, we have Monday calls where it's all about kind of sharing knowledge, like, oh, I learned, you know, whether it's lessons learned or giving presentations or workshops. You know, they could be code workshops, they could be interior related workshops, or how to detail this. Because we're such a kind of generalist, we have to be good at so many things. The office is structured in that there's go-to people that are really the people that know X, Y, or Z, and you know who to go to for that. And then we're kind of sharing broadly so that everyone has a basic understanding of a lot more, even if it's maybe not the thing that they're working on. It's still something that they might be interested in on the side, because I think we all have so many interests now. Okay, so just going through a few projects. This one we just finished, before picture on the bottom left. This is a concrete building about 2 blocks from our office in the Fashion District. And City of LA has about 1,600 non-ductile concrete buildings. This is one of them. There's a mandatory retrofit ordinance. This is one of the policy reform things we're really focused on, because it is so expensive to retrofit these buildings that we like to help owners figure out ways to create more revenue out of the buildings, right? So, and that's where it's like being an architect that's more than just an architect. So coming up with ideas for revenue, right? Which translates into the architecture, like having a connection and a voice in all of those things, instead of just having developers that come to us and say, here, this is what you're going to do. Make it work. You know, yeah, you can design it, but this is what you're going to do. It's even much more fun to start from how are we going to do, you know, what is it that we're going to do? What is the program? It's really starting with those ideas. So, and this one has a big roof. So if you're retrofitting the entire building, and that's a very expensive endeavor, one of the ways to create more revenue out of the building is to add an addition on the roof. And then that not only can create additional square footage that's leasable, but it can create an identity or brand to the building and kind of, you know, morph together all of those things. So that's something that we find fun. Another type of project we just finished, the Proper Hotel, which is a high-end boutique hotel. It was a conversion. It was originally built in the 1920s to be a gentleman's club, not a strip club, but more of like like an athletic club, but more of a men's business club. And there was some really, and then it became a YWCA for a few decades. So there was, I think, like in a building like this, we kind of go in and really see things. And again, it's that uncovering potential. Like, for example, there was an old small indoor pool and a old small indoor basketball court, like not current size or anything. And the owner just said, okay, so we're going to get rid of those and stack all the units, or the keys down through the building. And we're like, wait. I know this is on the 6th and 7th floor of a 13-floor building, but we got to find some way to reuse these features, because even though they didn't have lots of gooey, ornate fabric, they're just really interesting things. Like when do you stay in a hotel room in the middle of a historic high rise and can have a pool in your suite? You know, this is LA. There's got to be somebody who can spend $8,000 a night for something like that. So, you know, that kind of stuff is also really fun. Like, how do you see what's there and come up with ideas for that reuse that's creative? Oh, there's really delay in my, there we go. Okay, so the biggest one we've worked on is Sears Landmark building. So this is 1.8 million square feet. There's about 6 Sears distribution centers around the country. This one is outside of downtown LA, and it is, we got it all the way through permitting, all the entitlements. It took like 5 years. It was a behemoth. I mean, yes, it's a behemoth building, but the permitting and everything was huge. And now it's been on hold and pause. It may die because of the costs associated with the adaptive reuse, which is really unfortunate. But in terms of the design, it has over 1,000 apartments, 200,000 square feet of office, 60,000 square feet of retail. And the building was, boy, it's really slow. Maybe try it here. No, there. So the section kind of shows the length of the building. I forget how many feet it is, but it was built in 8 stages over time. And it kind of basically kept building out the back, right? So in order to put that much housing in a building with a floor plate, that enormous light courts are pretty much the only option, unless you have a totally different solution, like we're doing one in Philadelphia right now, where you put parking in the middle of the building, and then you have all the housing units around the outside, because it's that big of a building, you know, like 600 feet kind of thing. But anyway, going back to Sears, the idea was, when we were placing those light courts, to maybe carve into the building at the location where the old exterior wall used to be. And so first of all, that makes it easier from a structural standpoint, but also kind of a cool way to have a light court, because you could have an old historic, you know, like old steel windows and heavy concrete frames, that were based on the original exterior wall. And then the other 3 sides of the light court, like really, just curtain wall glass, kind of very modern. So things like that were really fun. But also when you're dealing with a building this huge, so much of it was about how do you connect people and how do you make it feel like its own community and neighborhood, and not that you're in your little space and there's no connection to anything else. So the light courts also really helped to do that. Like, for example, the before after on the right, showing how even if you're on the roof, even if you're not going, hey, to somebody down there in the light court, you have a visual connection to other life and energy happening in the building. We have a lot of pedestrian walkways that go through the light courts, as opposed to just dark, 600-foot long corridors, which would not be so great. And then the middle top image you can see in the food hall at the bottom, just even getting that light court to have the glass on top, besides just getting glazing and light into the food hall, which would otherwise be very dark, it's also connecting you. So again, you're sensing that there's all this energy and vitality happening up above. This is a building we're doing in the Arts District, and the Arts District is a neighborhood that is there, a lot of cool old warehouses and cool old buildings, but a lot of them are getting torn down for new construction. So this building was kind of a little crappy 3-story unreinforced masonry building, and the owner is an artist and a developer from South Africa, very established and has some money. And he really wants to build, him and his wife, an art hotel, and not just like, oh, we put art on the walls kind of hotel. Like, it's programmed. There's all sorts of events, art events happening there. There's the hotel, there's food and beverage, there's artists in residence being involved with the art happening. And so this, to me, this is just like the perfect solution for the Arts District, because it's keeping, the integrity of the arts in the neighborhood, because a lot of times you tear down these buildings, the funky old galleries and artists can't afford to live there, and you get these like really boring new construction buildings, like the one that's wrapping around our project is an example of that. But this one keeps the old building and keeps its kind of quirky character, and then and then it still is densifying and improving the neighborhood at the same time by having a new construction high rise. So this one, I think we did this. So we did this part about maybe it was pre-COVID. And then just going through the city of LA is so cumbersome, and getting entitlements. So basically allowing this use on the land is a multi-year, like at least a 3-year process. So we're just starting to get into now, SD, DD, and CDs. So we'll be submitting to plan check, I don't know, probably in like 9 months or a year. It's a pretty big project. So that one is very exciting. And also our first new construction, like big new construction one. This is the Singer. It's a historic building on Broadway, which are commercial entertainment. Well, it was the original commercial entertainment district, and it's had a very hard time revitalizing. Part of the reason it's been harder than the rest of the historic core is because the rest of the historic core had buildings that are shaped like a C or an E or a U, meaning they were old offices that didn't have air conditioning because they were built in the 20s. So they had a lot of light and ventilation. Now on Broadway, because that was the commercial entertainment district, the buildings tend to be no windows on the side, very deep. So they were either department stores or there was storage above. So they don't work as well for housing. So in this particular building, the owner said, hey, what if we do one really swanky, large unit per floor, which was like the opposite of what everybody else is doing. He's like, oh, it's LA. There's got to be at least 7 people in the entire city of Los Angeles that would want this, 5,000 square foot, really cool unit. And we're like, okay, but we gotta get them indoor outdoor space. We got to get them a patio. We got to get them better light, because the sides of the building, again, didn't have much light. So on the top right, you can kind of see where we carved. I guess it's kind of hard to see exactly what we did there, but it's showing we kind of carved into the sides of the building, pushed the storefronts in, created outdoor spaces within the envelope. And we could only do this really because the two buildings adjacent to this building were historic, small, low buildings. So we knew no one's going to be able to build, like a 20-story building on top of those buildings. So it also made sense to spend the money on pushing in on the sides. So it was, again, like trying to come up with creative ideas to use the strict code, create what you need to make the space viable and successful for, what it's going to be. Am I doing on time? Keeps turning off. Just okay. I'm close. So then Interstellar. So we do a lot of small restaurant bars where we kind of do soup to nuts. So it's really fun when we get to design and or specify every single thing. Even, our folks are out there laying out the product and, oh, it should be here. And you need a plan on this side. And some of the branding, the signage, it's really fun to be able to kind of go down to that level of detail, which is hard to do on the really big projects, or sometimes on the hotel projects, they always want a separate interior designer. But we did just finally get our first huge hospitality project where we're also the interior designers. So we're excited about that. So some other endeavors that have been important to me that I've been doing that are also connected to Omgivning is I started a light fixture company called Omalum. So we wanted to design light fixtures that we want to use in our projects. And we were thinking, well, the projects are big enough that they can kind of support, this effort and that we could kind of sell them ourselves to our clients. So it's been relatively successful. I think, it's basically been on pause also for a few years, and mostly just because I am way beyond capacity of what I can do. And I need to figure out, how to expand more with partners and that other people can be doing more. I mean, I already have a lot of partners and I certainly didn't do this in a vacuum, but expanding more and to really make some of these things work. It keeps skipping one. Okay. We've also worked a lot with product prototypes and with the idea of, how do we move from doing custom furniture in our projects into actually product for sale. So repetition of them, because one-offs of anything are great and fulfilling and exciting, but it's almost impossible to make money doing it that way, right? So how do we kind of create a mechanism that can also create money? And that's also part of the development scheme. So I'm moving into, and I've always wanted to do development. Part of the plan is to become more of our own client and to be able to do more of our own projects. So right now, we put in an offer on our first building after me looking for 4 or 5 years. It's so difficult, especially in Los Angeles. It's so expensive here. It's $2.5 million for basically a piece of crap that's about 5,000 square feet. So very difficult. And so anyway, that really kind of leads into my overall idea of a business model or an architecture firm that is not necessarily the traditional model. So this is a little diagram that I put together to try to explain all my crazy thoughts to my staff a few years ago, because they're like, what are you just all over these guys? It's too much, I just want to do my project. I'm like, okay, great. You do your project, but I got some bigger plans. So I tried to diagram it. So this is Omgivning in 2009 when we started, and then starting the light fixture company, and the product stuff was called Ohm Home. And then expanding out, and to 2020, we actually did get this far. But basically the idea is to expand into something like this. And it's not that, oh, there's going to be 20 companies that Karin's running. That is not the idea. The idea is how does a medium to small architecture firm, first of all, compete with like Gensler or like the big guys, right? Because they have so many resources and they can underbid you anything that they want, they can basically get. And just the nature of business in our country is becoming even more and more about merger acquisition. It's not really merger, it's really acquisition. So how do these bigger companies get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger by buying smaller companies? And it's getting really bad. So my idea is more that there's a lot of small independent companies that can be interconnected. And so we call this the interstellar map, because it's really about this interconnection and everything is connected. So whether it's I'm Givning has a development company, even that development company, we would be partnered with a GC and a brokerage, and maybe different projects are different, but it's about partnerships, right? And combining resources. Well, he can provide that and she can provide that and we can provide this. How can we compete with like a regular developer or a big architecture firm? Same thing with even having remote work and having different locations where we can be working. So for example, I can have an employee in Philadelphia who's licensed, and that will then open up opportunity and resources to us doing work in Philadelphia. Whereas if I'm just the small firm and I'm only licensed in California and we're only in Los Angeles, this can expand. So there's a lot of moving parts. Is it over ambitious? Absolutely. But I think it's a constantly evolving thing for me too, as where it's going to go, where it's going to take us. But it's definitely about smaller independent companies and people and getting architects to get a piece of the pie, instead of us just working our butts off and being so smart and brilliant and getting very little money for it, finding ways to get paid for what we're worth and to love what we do. So I would say that is the finale of my talk. Oh, I did go over. I thought I'd be under.
Thank you, Karin, so much. I think we can just open up for questions. Peter is here too. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Peter.
Thanks so much, Karin.
Hey, Karin. Nice to see you. I'm sorry I'm late.
Oh, that's all right.
Yeah, it's very noisy here, so I'm going to turn off my microphone. Currently in Florida, but not on spring break.
Anyone have any questions?
Not so much a question, just a reaction, but also like Peter, most of our faculty are at the ARCC conference in Florida right now. That's where everybody is. But I just, I was really impressed by the preservation work, in the sense that, protecting and reusing and saving these buildings, but also the sort of, contemporary design, and the integration of old and new was just really elegant. And I really, loved looking at all those projects. Thank you for sharing.
Ooh. Actually, there's one thing I wanted to say. I didn't bring it up, that the narrative, I think, has changed for us, because when I started with the adaptive reuse, sustainability really wasn't even a thing. And at least it wasn't on my radar at all, right? Because that was 99. And it's amazing to think how it was not on people's radars back then. There was a few, but it was a very small group. And then as as things have moved forward, and also we have such an enormous housing crisis in California, and California has really recognized, we're definitely ahead of the curve in terms of progressive, almost too regulatory reform towards energy savings and creating buildings that are net zero and everything we can do. So it's really been interesting how the narrative has changed so much to us and how passionate we are about sustainability now and reusing buildings, because it's so obvious now. Before it was, oh yeah, that's a great thing to do, reuse a building. Now it's like, no, we have to reuse buildings. It is ridiculous. You should not be tearing any buildings down. So let's get creative. Let's get some policy reform so it's easier and it's not so expensive, and let's reuse buildings.
Yeah, if I could jump in there, Karin, I remember the moment in our fields and the profession's discussions about this kind of familiar statement of the most sustainable building is the existing one, right? When it seemed, maybe this is my perspective, but it seemed like the paradigm shifted from greenfield site equals kind of the blank slate. That's the opportunity that most students are given, and that we think is kind of an ideal scenario for architects, right? Greenfield, new construction, new possibilities, and that paradigm has shifted towards that actually not being the ideal situation in all cases. In fact, in there are more radical points of view, like Aaron Besky's calling for, and this was a few years ago, calling for no new greenfield projects. Like, we have to be radical, and like everything has to be either a renovation or glommed onto some kind of adaptive reuse kind of configuration. I'm just curious if you're in terms of that spectrum, if you will, and I'm thinking of like BedZed and projects, and firms that are sort of more extreme in their focus on only using salvage materials, and how do you kind of position yourself and your firm in that conversation about reuse? Like, how much reuse should there be? How do you balance that,
Right.
and practicalities, etc.?
Well, I think, for example, the one that I showed that was in the Arts District, where we kept the little building and then built the new construction. Like, to me, that's a win-win for sure. Plus, it's a parking lot, right? So the parking lot gets the new construction and really densifies, but the existing building stays. It was going to be way too expensive to add on top of that existing building because it is, kind of brittle. So, I mean, I think every site is different, but the biggest and I would say that we are willing to go all the way, like, to figure out how to reuse buildings, but so many times it's just way too expensive. Like, it's not even close to viable, which is why we're trying to work so hard on this policy reform. And now the state has issued a new bill to mandate adaptive reuse to give funding for the first time ever. Because that's also part of our wildfire issue, is like expanding out into these natural areas. If we can keep the densification and reuse buildings in the heart of the cities, that's a win-win for combating climate change and providing housing, all that kind of stuff. Wait, so did I answer your question? Yeah, I think the problem is a lot of times it doesn't work because of cost. And so, especially when I see these really awesome projects in magazines and how people are reusing, I'm like, how do they do that? Like, there's, and I'm thinking maybe it's a California thing because the retrofits, the seismic zone, but a lot of what I see, there's no way we could do here. But I'm willing to keep pushing to figure out how we can.
Thank you. I saw we had a sighting of Chris Jarrett, who was my predecessor for, I think, a decade, right? For 10 years as the director of the School of Architecture until a couple of years ago. He is currently the acting president for ARCC and organizer of the conference that Peter is attending.
Oh, great.
So I don't know if
He's
we'll see
busy.
a sighting of him again, Peter. But,
Can I ask a dumb
I
question?
could try to call him over, but he might be busy.
Can I ask a dumb question? What ARCC stands for? I always feel badly.
It's the Architecture
Architecture Research Centers Consortium.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Not a dumb question.
So many acronyms in the world.
Indeed. Any other questions for Karin?
I'm curious about this kind of school of fish idea of having many small firms together, Karin. Tell me how that works and is it successful?
I would say it's the biggest issue I think we've found so far is everyone has to be rowing in the or swimming in the same direction. And that's very hard to do when you have a lot of independent smaller firms. However, I think some of these like bigger picture mission driven things that we're talking about, so whether it's reuse, whether it's combating climate change, whether it's providing housing that's affordable, those things are big enough and strong enough as a mission for a lot of people that I think that, and that's what I'm trying to figure out right now is like, okay, how do I make our mission clearer to who are the right partners, whether it's an engineering firm or a branding company or a lender or a broker, like how do we, because just naturally the brokers, for example, because we're very involved with a lot of brokers because we like to give them information about what might work for that building you're trying to sell. So then also hopefully we get the project when it comes through, but also so they can keep the building. But like it's hard to get brokers, for example, to steer on a mission-driven thing. So there's always conflicting things, and also we're all individuals, right? So we all have, and small companies all have, where they're going. So I think that's been the biggest problem. And then also it's a very democratic kind of, there isn't this hierarchy, which is, that nature of if you have a firm that has, it's top down, it's very clear, who's telling you what to do. So it's very clear, but I mean, I personally would not want to be in a system that's like that. So even whether it's our firm or the firms the relationship we're trying to have with firms, this more, hey, we're all making decisions together. It's time consuming, it's difficult. But that's why I'm constantly trying to work on how do we make that happen? And I think a lot of it is defining roles, be really, really clear. Okay, you're in charge of this, and you're accountable for that. And then you're in charge of that and you're accountable for that, because someone might be in charge of something, but the accountability kind of falls off. And that's also when the structure falls apart, and again, if you're a top-down corporate firm, well, you get fired or you get demoted or you get yelled at or whatever. But when it's more free, there still has to be a system to make things work. And I think a lot of that is clarifying roles and expectations.
That's something I'm trying to do.
It's really
But I
hard.
think, yeah, no, I think we all are trying to do that, right? We want a democratic process for everything as much as we can, but at the same time, it's that delegation and how to navigate differences in a productive way, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I used to have, it was like me and I had 6 directors, and we basically made all the decisions together about everything we did in the firm as we were growing. And it was like, oh, this is just not working. This is just too much. And it's a lot of money for us all to sit in meetings and like decide everything together. So in the pandemic, especially, and also we were growing so fast, we didn't have time to rethink, well, what's a better way? We were growing. So in the pandemic, we really kind of rethought that. It's like, okay, no, let's structure this so that it's, again, you're in charge of this, and then you present to us, this is what we're doing, and get feedback, because you still want, everyone has a different lens. Like this person might be looking at it through this lens, this person's looking at it from this lens, this person has different life experience, they bring something to it. So getting that input is really important, but trying to have that one person in charge, or maybe it's 2 people that are workshopping something together, and this is what we're going to do, and then presenting it, get input from everybody, and then also everyone feels involved. And then making it happen. So we've been trying to do it more that way.
I do have another question. Just thinking about your, what I would say is the environment in the field and related fields for women and architects of color, and being a leader and woman architects leading the profession. Do you, from your perspective, are things getting better? We have a long way to go, obviously, but you know, what I'd love to hear your perspective on any changes that are happening.
Yeah. So I've never been one that's like, hey, I need to join a women's group. Let's do that. Right. But because I'm just usually charging ahead, not really even aware if someone's looking at me as, oh, well, you're a woman. But, you know, I had so many, I even had a UNCC professor told me I shouldn't be an architect. I had a high school professor, teacher told me I should not be an architect. It's just, you know, I don't know. The high school one was definitely a chauvinist situation. The UNCC one was, he was trying to kick me in the butt. And it did kick me in the butt. And I was like, what? I'll show you, you know.
I really regret saying that, Karin.
I don't think I ever had you, Peter. So you cannot be blamed. But wait, where is I going with this? Yeah, so in the early years, it was bad. And like, you know, those first 5 or even 10 years working through the 90s into the early 2000s, I was always the youngest and the only female at the table trying to run the project. And that was, you know, it was difficult. Thank God I was 5'10", you know, and I have a voice, and, you know, like I had other physical things that helped, because again, everyone's different. Yes, I'm white. I have big features, you know, so I think it's just like weird things that help or don't help. But in terms of the profession right now, you know, my understanding with the numbers and everything is, you know, school is great. Getting out of school, starting work is great. But the numbers really started to fall off when women reached the age where they were having kids, right? But I think that is really shifting. And I think COVID has really helped shift it fast. Well, COVID didn't actually help because that was a terrible time for mothers, but the ability to remote work and have flexibility in the workplace becoming more of a norm is a great thing for mothers. And so I think that's going to really propel women through that tough time of, well, you're trying to balance all this stuff, you know, with that flexibility. And then, but the numbers in terms of like women who have FAIA are very, very, very low. And even worse than architecture is developers. Like the number of women developers is crazy low. It makes architects look like, you know, we're just doing great. So I have been joining some women developer groups. And like, oh, okay, maybe I'll actually join some women groups, and this could be helpful as a network, and I can ask stupid questions and not feel like I'm being looked down on or whatever. And especially at this point, I don't mind asking stupid questions because I feel like I have enough other stuff I've done that, you know, whatever. But it's hard when you're like 25 and you want to ask a stupid question, you're too afraid, you know.
Thank you. Yeah, we're hosting the Say It Loud North Carolina exhibition. We have one version of it, and then NC State has another version of it, celebrating the work of women and architects and designers of color in the state, students through, you know, alums and faculty, et cetera. And it's really been impressive. And for what it's worth, we had 3 times the amount of participation as the next. And I think there have been 27 Say It Loud events. So the state has just done a phenomenal job. But that's one of the missions, right? How do we change that balance? So, Karin, thank you so much. Your work is truly inspiring, and congratulations on your fellowship.
Thank you too.
For everyone who did, I was able to see her on stage, even though we weren't able to meet up later because the crowd was so big and distracting. But anyway, congratulations. And that is something we need to work on, is getting more women fellows as well. But please come back and see us whenever you can.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Your door's always open, of course, and we're proud to have alums like you. And for everyone, Karin's work will be part of the exhibition, both in person, the physical in-person exhibition, as well as online. So,
great. All right. Well, thanks
so
very
much.
much, and have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.